This week's guest is Humble the Poet. He is a Canadian-born rapper, spoken word artist, poet, internationally best-selling author, and former elementary school teacher. What began as reciting spoken word poetry in coffee shops to impress girls evolved into a creative adventure that has spanned the last 10 years, crossing genres, mediums, and oceans. His first two releases, Unlearn and Things Nobody Can Teach Us, have become international bestsellers. You can visit him at humblethepoet.com. Humble, welcome to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your book comes out next week. This is so exciting.
Yes.
The book is How to Be Loved.
How to Be Loved.
I'm like obsessed with it already. I got a little sneak peek, so I want to talk about it. But tell me a little bit more, like the background here. You know, I see here that you're an elementary school teacher turned rapper, spoken word artist, poet. You have like a massive following on YouTube and, you know, the rest of the social media gang. How did that background set you up for, you know, being able to not only understand love, but articulate love?
Yeah, I think it started as when I was an elementary school teacher. I think the big lesson I took from all of that was how to package things and make it digestible for anyone to kind of understand. So, you know, you're teaching a bunch of 8-year-olds, you know, addition and subtraction or word problems or what have you. You know, what you realize is nothing's too complicated for them. It really is just about how you package it for them. And that really started to impact how I communicated with people. And I was always making music. And I think that the longer I spent in the classroom, the simpler my music even got and my lyrics. And when I got to a point where, you know, it wasn't sustainable for me to be in the studio all the time, I just started writing. And, you know, the first thing I wrote was, you know, lessons I needed to learn in my own life and mistakes that I had been making and kind of processing them, you know, probably journaling before I could afford a therapist. And I kind of figured out that a lot of the stuff that I was enthusiastic about doing was unlearning, you know, so instead of really grabbing new ideas, it was kind of challenging the older ideas and why we have them. And that's kind of been my journey up until this point. It's just like unlearning things that we've been taught. And
give me an example, like what I feel like I've been part of this journey too, unlearning something. So I would love to hear about your journey. Like, give me an example of something that you had to unlearn. Maybe more than one.
So, I mean, I guess, you know, overall, it was, you know, if I treat people well, that doesn't, you know, instantly entitle me to be treated well. You know, that's not how the nature of the world works. You know, just because I wouldn't eat a lion doesn't mean the lion's not going to eat me. So it was really about divorcing myself from this idealistic, romanticized view of life. You know, I think in terms of love, because, you know, we're here to chat about that. One of the big ones is love is fuel, not glue. I think very often people believe in, you know, love will keep them together, but love is what motivates people to work to stay together. You know, the spark, I know you've mentioned the spark as well being bullshit. You know, it's your fight or flight.
Agree?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, it's your fight or flight. It's letting you know that somebody matches the flavor of some previous trauma you have and probably the foundation of mommy and daddy issues. So,
oh God, let's talk about this because I know right now people are soaking this up. So yesterday I got a question from a woman.
Yeah.
I do Ask a Matchmaker Wednesdays. People ask me questions and, you know, I reply with, it's infotainment on my end. And someone I forget the wording of it right now, but it was something along the lines of like, I've been dating this person for 6 weeks. They check all the boxes, but I just don't, I just feel bored. And and they didn't use in those words. They were like a little bit more innocuous, but I remember thinking like, if they check all the boxes and you just feel bored and they're not boring, that's on you. So like, to me, I immediately started saying like, you gotta, you know, one of the things that studies have shown from the NIH, from the National Institute of Health in the United States, has shown that if you were to inject dopamine into a relationship once a month, it has lasting effects. And I mentioned like going to a comedy club, going to see an action film, going to an amusement park, like these things inject the dopamine that we need. And it's like what you just said, the flight or fight mode. It's like everyone's looking for like this anxiety that's just so toxic. I mean, tell me what you see. I love talking to other people that examine love this way. So
yeah, I think what I realize is, you know, how much we're influenced by outside factors to kind of determine what we think is important to us.
right.
And it's like, at the end of the day, you know, a healthy relationship should feel peaceful. There should be moments of excitement that you can voluntarily, as you said, voluntarily inject the dopamine in this controlled excitement. Let's go to a concert, let's go on vacation, let's do something really cool.
Right.
But at the end of the day, so often we're watching Disney movies, we're watching porn, we're watching Ross and Rachel. And the only way for a lot of these things to keep our attention is for it to be these cat and mouse games, or for them to be hyper normal, or for them not to reflect what a day-to-day life is. And especially in the films, like the films don't show you the lulls and the gaps. They just show you the highlight reels. And then you're comparing, other people's highlight reels with your behind the scenes, and not understanding that we don't have full access to what's really happening in other people's lives. So for me, it's really understanding that, healthy relationships, and the healthiest relationships I know, would never make for great TV, because they're not the most eventful, but they are peaceful, and everybody in them feel great. So, it is, as I took a deep dive into attachment styles and understanding a lot of this, you start to realize that, yeah, this spark, it goes in the same category to me as like salty fast food. It's delicious in the short term, but it's not nutritious, and too much of it over the long term is just going to chip away at you.
I love the analogy, because that's essentially what that is. Like when it's a salty ass fry from McDonald's, when Burger King is far superior. I will die on that hill. Do you have Burger King? You're in Canada, right?
No, I'm Canadian, but I live in LA.
Oh, okay.
But
that's
yes, we
fun.
do have Burger King in Canada. We have everything you have here, and we have more.
You just have better people there. I have such an affinity for Canadians. It's funny because like I'll meet with clients sometimes and I'm like, they're Canadian, and like I say it like let's have some creme brulee. Like this is it. So I love that.
We have 1/10 the population. We have the space to be nice. That's what.
And way less guns.
Way. Yeah, we have more guns per person, but way less guns in total.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, to kind of go back to like attachment theory, when you started deep diving, did you deep dive in like when you were a teacher? Because, I've been getting lately, and I'll definitely have on this colleague of mine in a few months, but I've been deep diving into conscious matchmaking. And one of the things that I've been learning about myself in the last 6 months is that I have even an attachment, like I might be a secure person, but like I have an attachment style to my client, to someone I'm helping. And so do my employees. And it's just like, sometimes it's because of the client, but also because of our own like experiences. And I think sometimes it has to do with like, here's expectation and here's reality. And I think what my team does sometimes, like we're giving that dose of reality. And I think when you were a school teacher, you have to tell me, but like you see a reality that a child is living in from a different lens than the parents.
Yeah, completely. It's, it is super interesting from that standpoint, because it, not only do you see this different reality of the child living in from the parent, you start to understand the reality that you were living in as a kid. You start to get reminded about how, I think one of the first things I remember was when I was a student teacher at Stolen University training to be a teacher. I did 6 months in the first grade. And I remember telling the kids, and this is in Toronto, being like, put on your boots and your snow pants. We're going outside. Then you watch a bunch of 6-year-olds put on their boots and then struggle to put the snow pants on, because they took it in the order you gave them the information.
Right.
And then you realize like, okay, well, they're literally empty vessels. And at some point I was completely an empty vessel. So much of the information, preferences, desires, and things that I have, there's a really good chance that a lot of this was socialized into me, and for me, it's not a nature versus nurture argument. It's how do nature and nurture work together. But I think it was a massive reminder that at some point there was nothing going on in here, and everything was explored and exposed and soaked up through my experiences, through the adults that raised me, and realizing that all the adults that raise us are, they're flawed human beings, as they will be. We can't hold that against them.
When did you learn that like your parents are flawed?
Oh man, I mean, I might have learned that like probably in high school. I mean, my parents were immigrants, so they were asking, we felt like their parents very quickly, just for
same.
The language difference and technology.
My dad still doesn't speak English.
Yeah. My
like
mom,
crazy to me. Like I'm like, how do you not speak English? He had a business for 30 years. Like how?
Yeah.
Like
they have their world, and then I try to wrap my head around trying to go to a different country and learn that language, and being like, how long would it take for me to figure it out? It's definitely bananas with them. And even me, I go back home every couple of months, And they'll just wait until I get there to like, oh, I have this notification on my iPad. I don't know how to make it go away. I'm like, you've been
Swear to you,
staring at that for like 3 months, waiting for me to come home.
I swear to you, every time my husband's parents live in Greece, and
Mhm.
every time we go, the first, like, people are like, "Oh, you're so lucky, you're going on vacation." I'm like, "Stop. I'm going to visit my in-laws. This is a trip." And the
Mhm.
first 5 days is playing not only tech support, but like errands. Like, we are going out to like, "Oh, this light has been flickering. I need you to fix it." Like, I get that. I totally get what you're saying. To go back to like, I really love this idea that, you come from a place of teaching
Yeah.
and, who you are now today. And I'm very curious to see like, we learn what love is from these flawed human beings that are, in our eyes as kids, they're divine,
Yeah.
right? They're our
Yeah.
gods.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, I think I would love to learn, like, do you see, when you were a teacher, could you see how kids are being loved at home based on their interactions with you and other students in the class?
Yeah. I mean, it was, one of the inconvenient truths that I realized in my career. And this doesn't reflect every single child or every single teacher, but this is just my unique experience in the years that I was teaching. I never once had a student who was struggling academically who had a good family life. You know,
Okay, hold up. Say that one more time. You never.
I never had a
Okay.
student who was struggling, like a struggling student.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they were struggling academically, they were struggling behavior wise. And
Right.
then when you saw their family life, they had a good family life.
Right.
So it was,
Okay.
I never had a kid who was just, they had a cognitive issue, they had whatever. It was, oh, I could always see the relationship between what was going on at home and what was happening in the classroom.
Yeah, yeah. Lack of
And it was like
consistency and
a lack of consistency and
all
all
that
of that,
stuff.
and I taught in a part of Toronto that was a needy neighborhood. So you had young parents, you had new immigrant parents, you had all of that. So again, not holding it against them, but you could start to see kind of the relationship with how much our environments impact us, whether we know it or not. And going back to the idea that, I don't know if we learn love from our parents, but I think our first understanding of what we think love is comes from those who raise us.
Totally.
And we're doing it with limited brain capacity. So, being ages 6 to 15 or what have you, your brain's still forming, but we're looking at the world in terms of black and white. It's a very dualistic world that we can understand life in. And as we become adults, we can understand life way more. Um, we can see the gray in between. We can see a lot more in between. But we don't update any of our understandings, intentionally. So there's a challenge for a lot of us because a lot of us grew up with parents who had other things going on. We
Mm.
didn't process that. So if they were having a bad day, or if we did something that upset them, or we were we were the straw that broke the camel's back, not realizing we were, um, that really sends a message to us that, oh, you have to earn affection, you have to earn attention, you have to earn love. And then you have so many people as adults, they chase that.
Starving for emotional
Yeah.
acceptance and acknowledgement.
Because if somebody gives it to you, then it feels foreign. So they push,
Right.
we ignore those who adore us and adore those who ignore us. Right. And we push that away. And this is all happening on a subconscious level because we haven't like sat down with a journal and just wrote this stuff out and been like, why am I attracted to the unavailable people? And it's like we think it's a type. And it's like, no, it's because you probably grew up in a house where you always felt like you had to earn love. And now you want to keep that going. We'll always lean towards familiar instead of what's healthy.
I mean, I feel like, tell me if you think this is correct, but I feel like I've witnessed that we're also attracted to familiar chaos. Like, think about when your parents fought when you were like 8 years old, or even if maybe a parent was missing, and that inconsistency when you're 8 years old and there's like stress. You're now 25 years old, you're in an adult relationship, that chaos is similar, but because you are familiar with the walls of that chaos, you're comfortable. Like, you
Yeah.
can logically say this is a bad relationship, but you'll stay in it because you're like, well, I understand it
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
subconscious level.
I think I have a friend who grew up in a bad neighborhood with a single parent,
Mm.
and they've since become extremely successful. I mean, very, very, very successful. And they still eat a dollar box of mac and cheese for dinner. Right. And they could
It's
afford
comfort food.
comfort food. They could afford a private chef.
Yeah.
And what I realize is it's that familiarity. This is like chemicals. This is like
Yeah.
trash what they're
It's
eating. But
it's called imprinting. Dr. Harvey, I think his name is Henry. He wrote a whole book about this, but it's that's what it is. It's, I mean, just like that comfort food, comfort love.
Yeah, exactly.
And
It's
that's,
what's familiar.
and I feel like that's what that phrase means. Like when people say like, oh, daughters marry their fathers and sons marry their mothers. It's like, it's, I don't know about your dating experiences or past, but like I remember there was in my early 20s, I kept dating men who would have the poor conflict resolutions of my father.
Mm,
Like I was getting into the same fights my mother would get into when I was growing up. And it was only until I consciously was like, I don't want to marry my dad. Like
mm,
I don't want, like I love my
yeah,
dad. He's a great grandfather to my kids and he's a great father to me. And I just don't want that relationship. Like
yeah.
I want someone who's like this. And I feel like once I made that, suddenly all of my dating decisions changed. So,
Mm.
I'm seeing you now, Humble. Like you're coming here with all of this like nuggets of wisdom and you've written a book and I want to talk more about that in a second. But like, do you feel like when you're shaping your conscious thought over the last, 10 years that you've started making different dating and relationship choices?
Um, I mean, I wasn't figuring it out that early. I think now I am definitely. And I think it was not just my parents. I think I also have two sisters, and I think
Okay.
the
Younger, older?
they're both older.
Okay.
Yeah, so both older, and I was the little bratty brother. So there was, I'm only realizing this recently. Like there was such a disconnect between us, where obviously they don't want to be, hanging out and conversing with their little brother. So I didn't know what was happening in their lives or what have you. But I think one of the two things I learned, I feel a lot later than I should have, having sisters in my house, is I didn't realize that women wore makeup. My sisters really didn't wear makeup. And the first time making an inappropriate comment like, why do you look so tired today? And really they're just not wearing makeup or what have you.
Right.
That wasn't something I grew up seeing.
Right.
Like my sisters, they were just, they, I don't know why they didn't. I feel like even now only one does. But like that wasn't something, maybe I would only
That's their
notice
choice.
lipstick or something. It was their
Yeah.
choice, yeah. But
Yeah.
it wasn't, yeah. They weren't spending a lot of time where I could see a difference in terms of what they look like with makeup or without. And the
Why
second
do
thing
you look
was
so tired? Did you say this to someone you were dating?
maybe,
What was their reaction?
I think they just shrunk to like an inch, like they became a little
Oh,
ball. And then I was
oh.
like, what did I say? Yeah, it's not. And then also, learning that my opinion matters. That's still something I wrap my head around with, especially with the women in my life, friends, family, and everything. That my opinion matters because I was the youngest and nobody cared what I had to say for so long.
What?
Yeah,
Like
so that
I
was an
never.
interesting thing. Yeah,
This is crazy. I have never even thought of that before.
and the other one is there was such a and this is again there was such a disconnect with me and my sisters, not because
How much older are they?
one's only a year older, one's only 5, but I think it was more
The gender
that I was the,
dynamic.
the gender dynamic. So until this day we're great. Me and my sisters have never had any major conflicts. As adults we get along very well. I'm still their only brother. They're my biggest advocates. They push my books. They do all this great stuff. They're
Ah, I
super
love it.
proud of me. But that affection wasn't there when we were young. When we were
Right.
young, I was just the brother and get out of my room, stop paying attention to my phone calls type situation. I didn't I didn't know time of the month. That wasn't something that I was aware of at all. I think I learned that through dating. I didn't know
Mm.
about I
How
didn't know
old are
about
we learning about this? Hold on.
I'm talking about maybe first year university, second year
Shit.
university.
That's like,
Yeah, yeah. But then also like and that also became like the first time I was like, oh my God, like these women who I continually prop up on pedestals, like these Topangas of my life, like they're
Topanga. Yeah.
yeah, they're just flawed. They're flawed human beings that can be goofy and make mistakes and say the wrong things. And I think up until that point, it was always I think my sisters, I don't know if they hid that part, but we were just there was such a disconnect where these weren't things I noticed. I saw my sisters fight a lot with each other and
Right.
negotiate who got to use the curling iron and the blow dryer or whatever the hell they were arguing over. But I remember like learning like the inconsistencies of human beings, but I had not seen a lot of that through women up until I became an adult.
Even though
And
you
that
lived with women, like
I live
how
with
interesting is
women.
that? Imagine what the dynamic, how different the dynamic would be if you were the eldest brother.
Yeah, I
Like
think it would
there
have
might
been
have been more I predict that there might have been more regard for your opinion because you were getting into high school first, or like, oh, he's going to protect me. Like, then it was just like, oh, my little brother, he's just growing.
Yeah.
Like, you don't, stay out of this. That's so interesting. One of my most favorite TikTok accounts lately has been this one called Roe versus Bros. Have you seen this? It's where a woman
Yeah.
interviews men on the street and she asks them questions about women's bodies.
Yeah.
And all it does is just, for me, it just tells me that like women should have absolutely zero decision making power when it comes to like women's healthcare issues, because like she'll ask them like, how many fallopian tubes does a woman have?
Yeah.
And they'll be like 7.
Yeah.
Or like, how many tampons does a woman go through? And they'll be like 1 a day. So
Yeah.
5. And I'm like, what? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, why are, whatever. That's interesting. Did your parents ever talk to you about sex or dating?
No, not at all.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, what immigrant family does?
Exactly.
Yeah, same.
That's what I'm saying. None of that happened. So I think for me, and also my sisters were extremely high achievers. Like they were very high achievers. So I think also just my assumption of just what women were was completely different. And then when I started dating, like the girls that I dated were always intimidated by my sisters, even though my sisters were not, they never played a role of trying to be intimidating. I think just them having their life together the way they had them, or the presentation that they had. Since and now that we're a lot older, I can see my sisters as the vulnerable, beautiful, flawed human beings that they are, and they've gone through some real shit in their lives, and we've had to be there for each other and all of that. But I think that in terms of the familiarity, I think there was that, and learning about my last serious relationship. My ex would tell me about her friends and how they kind of had that Miss Maisel. I don't know if you've seen the first episode of Miss Maisel, that Miss Maisel thing where they waited for the husbands to fall asleep before they took the makeup off. They woke up before, put the makeup on.
Yeah.
And it was like at that
I know
level
people
of
like that. And I'm like, you're living a lie.
Yeah. And then
be vulnerable.
Yeah. And I think that, and what I've learned through therapy is, I crave a level of depth that I sabotage by not being vulnerable. And so there's a challenge there even in myself, because although I had a mother, I grew up in a household with a mother and 2 sisters, I also had a father who was subconsciously signaling that vulnerability was weakness.
I think traditional gender norms are something that are kind of breaking down with the next generation. Like I see, like, even with my kid, it's so funny. I messaged one of my friends yesterday about this. So my son, he's 5 and he's in his 2nd year of ballet and tap. And I took him to see the Rockettes on Monday. One of my friends there, she's like the leader there. So I was like, oh, you get to meet her after. And he's just like really excited. And he's, free spirit, whatever. And the amount of DMs I got from people I don't know who were like, he's so lucky. What do you say? It's so nice that you let your son be himself, which to me is like a microaggression, because it's like they're telling me it seems like your son is gay and it's so nice that you're letting him be who he is. And I don't know my son's sexuality. That's gross. He's 5. Like, why are you like, there's other ways to say, good for you for supporting his spirit, which is, you could say that, or you could say, seems like Yanni had a great day, or he seems like he's having a lot of fun, or it's so great that he likes dance. The whole, like, it's nice that you let him be himself. And I don't think people mean to make it a microaggression, but it goes back to like what you're saying, where it's like your parents teach us these like gender norms from our generation and the previous generations, and it's like, what am I supposed to say to a 5-year-old? No, you can't tap dance. Like, that's not, like, that's weird to me to say that to someone.
Yeah. And I think the irony of it too is, the message that you're getting, I think they're still looking at it from a surface level, where, the real dangers are around shame and sexuality, and shame and sex.
Totally.
And for a 5-year-old, my understanding is, through my training as a teacher, that doesn't manifest in sexual conversations. That just manifests in what we consider gross. So we're not supposed to tell our kids that anything they do or say is gross. So if they want to talk about poop, for example, you don't say, don't speak about that. Like,
we talk about poop all day here.
Yeah, we don't allow that. We don't allow topics to be taboo which is
Right.
the first step into healthy sexuality for them
Right.
growing up, irrespective of what direction they take their life sexually. I think that is a dramatically more important conversation, which is not shaming them into exploring that world more so than what we consider, oh well, tap dancing means that you're this, or
It was just so weird to like hear
yeah.
people that I like, and then it's so funny because on Tuesday I picked him up from school and he said that this girl was chasing him at the playground, and the way he said it, and I remember I almost caught myself. I was like, I think if I had said this 30 years ago to my parents, maybe someone would have said, oh, does he like you, or is that your boyfriend? And I was like, you're not going to ask a 5-year-old, does she like you? Just be like, I just asked him, how did that make you feel? Like, that's all I asked. And he was like, well, I
Mhm.
was really tired. I really, I started sweating and it's so cold outside. So I needed to get my hat. And I was like, oh, okay. So she was just chasing you. Got it. Like, I don't have to, but you see the push, right? And I think
Yeah.
those are ways that we do learn love in a very heteronormative way that we're subconsciously doing constantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that does reflect as adults, like what we think is proper and improper. And you picked up on something just now where it's like, when we shame this sort of stuff, I think that is where deviance begins. Right.
Yeah.
Because it's like, but I don't know. I'm not an expert on all that, but those are just like my hypothesis.
But I think the importance of this conversation more is just bringing the awareness, being like,
Right.
oh, because I think oftentimes a lot of the important decisions and habits we develop and make happen very young as coping
Totally.
mechanisms for the chaos that we're experiencing that we can't process because our brains aren't there, and then we just never upgrade the software. We never upgrade. The big joke in the South Asian one is, your parents don't let you date. They threaten to kill you if they
And then
find
you
out you're
turn
dating.
27, you're like, where's your wife? Where's your
Yeah.
husband?
Yeah,
Like,
where
what?
are they? And you're like, when
Yeah.
did you upgrade the law? Like when did
Right.
this change?
This happens in the Greek community too. Like I
Yeah.
have, I'll meet women and men all the time, and they're like, my dad and mom never allowed me to go. I remember one woman, her parents would drop her off at college. They would wait in the parking lot, and then they would take her home. Like she was not allowed to socialize. And then she turns 26, and her parents are like, why aren't you married?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you didn't even let me have a co-ed
Yeah.
relationship. What do you mean get
Yeah.
married? Like,
Why aren't you married with your one hand tied behind your back social skills now,
yeah.
and all the other things that need to happen now as an adult? You're gonna have to go through your first heartbreak and all of these different things that are kind of essential to this journey.
What
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
think, to kind of piggyback off that now, like obviously our parents do wrong things. What do you think most of us are doing wrong when it comes to love?
Um, I think where we are now in 2023 is I think a lot of us prioritize being likable. I think we think being liked is more important than being loved. And
That's the ending of that's how I end my shows. You know that, right?
what do you say?
uh, and I'll tell you why. I'll explain why. But I end the show every week by saying, be lovable, but more importantly, be likable. But there's a reason why I say it like that.
Okay.
Do you want to know?
Yeah.
So, I think it's very easy to fall in love with someone, but I think it is really hard to like someone for the next 30 or 40 years of your life, which means that
Mm,
you've got to do things that are likable and so do they. So that way you can share in that experience with each other of your own separate lives when you're together, so that it's like you're always dating your partner.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
tell me, I mean, I agree on your stance here too. So there's both sides here. So tell me a little bit more about how we invest more on being likable instead of being lovable.
Well, I love how you framed it too, because it's like in the long term of a relationship, you have to prioritize liking the person. And I've heard parents say, "I love my kids, but I don't like them," and I think there's a
Oh yeah.
hilarity to that.
Yeah.
I think I guess I'm speaking from like the beginning, like your
Yeah.
first date,
Tell
and
me more.
so we prioritize being liked, and some of the things that we do to be liked. This was a conversation I had recently with another friend. Is realizing that, for example, women should not be competing over men.
Oh
It's
wow,
a
we're going to like we're going to the deep end. Okay,
yeah,
hold up.
because
Tell me more.
it's an instant loss. Like there isn't a structure to that competition that makes you a winner, because generally the way the way a woman can successfully take a man from somebody else is to just have less boundaries. And that ends up why women's power comes in them being the choosers, them saying no, them deciding, they're the selectors, and men have to compete to be selected. Women, the dynamics of things are different in that capacity. So if two women are competing, it's really going to become who can drop their boundaries quicker.
Right.
And then
I mean, you see this in the animal world, and humans are animals too. So we do see this like in studies, like, if you were dating in China,
yeah,
where there's more women than men,
yeah,
men have to compete for
yeah,
a mate. And that's where you say, like, you see women saying stuff like, if he doesn't have an apartment, if he doesn't have a car, I'm not going on a date with him. And
yeah,
then you go to places like Miami, where there are way more women than men,
yeah,
or in Manhattan, where there are more straight women than men,
yeah,
straight men. And you see that it turns into like harem. Like suddenly it's like, men are very dismissive of women. They have the paradox of choice running against them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which, and again, it's less a conversation about what's the right way or the wrong way, but I think it's also just a conversation of how it's been in the transition of how that's changing. So,
Right.
for example, saying, we go to China and the women have all these demands of what the men needs to be.
Sure.
Most of those demands, again, they're not making a man lose himself. He needs to have an apartment. He needs to have a job. He needs to have a good,
It's not
status.
like become cool girl.
Yeah.
And
I'm not losing myself in the process, making myself more desirable in the dating pool.
right.
Whereas, as I said, if two women are competing, reducing your boundaries will be a go-to. That's choosing being likable over lovable, because that's going to impact your self-love. When you don't show your teeth and don't establish your boundaries and don't say no, that's going to lead to resentment. That's going to lead to having to compensate for that in other capacities. So I think that's a really important thing. So when I'm talking about likable, I mean in the sense that we derive our value in relation to the people around us, but that was an important feature when we were in smaller communities. When we were in communities of 100 people, and your acceptance by the community directly impacted your ability to actually live, right? And you can understand where you stood in the hierarchy in a tribe of 100, 200 people.
Right.
Stephen Pressfield talks about this, and he goes, he doesn't have the exact number, but he knows the number is probably like middle school. Where you are in the hierarchy of middle school. He goes, it's impossible to understand your hierarchy in Manhattan. And what that's doing is that's jumbling our wiring, because we're constantly chasing being top dog, but we don't even know where the ladder is to climb, let alone because and I think all of us see this even in our careers, where it's like you hit a certain level and it opens you to a whole new world. Like, oh wow, there's a whole new level to this. And so chasing that hierarchy
and compound that with like different regions and different cities. Like one of my colleagues just spoke at some big event in Mexico City, and like the woman hosting is like the Oprah of Mexico. And I don't know who this person, like, I'm just like, what, like, what's so exactly. Yeah, totally. Yeah. You don't know the hierarchy of multiple, it also, I think what also you're touching on with the likability factor is, it reminds me of, have you ever read the book or watched the movie, Gone Girl?
Yeah.
Do you know the cool girl monologue that the main character, it's
not off the top, but
so I think a lot of my listeners might know it, but like the cool girl monologue is basically where she says, like, you create this likable character for men to want, right? Which is like, I can drink a beer and I can have a pizza, but I'm also really thin, and we can have anal sex and I'll hang out with the boys. And like, she kind of, it's like a whole monologue of like what makes a cool girl. And you sell this thing only to eventually get married to that guy who wanted the cool girl. But then it's like, that's not your true self. That was someone that you made that was likable for that person. And then, but you ultimately want to be loved. And this is starting to, there was another movie that just recently came out that's like the same premise, which is like, I forget which one, I saw a trailer of it, but it's like, this isn't me. Like, I want to live in my truth, and I can't be likable to you.
Yeah. And living in your truth will make you a much more specific individual, which by default will reduce the amount of people that you're going to be compatible with, which is okay. I think that's I think it's being likable is making yourself vanilla ice cream. And you're like, well, everybody likes vanilla ice cream, or what, even though everybody doesn't. But you're trying to widen the net. But I don't think widening the net in this capacity works in the long run, because you're looking for a forever person. And,
Right.
you're looking for someone to build a relationship with. So the
Right.
specific qualities. And I think right now, most people, when they list the qualities they're looking for somebody, they're not specific to them. They're just these generic qualities, and they haven't gone through the work to figure out, well, why is this important? Why is it important to have a rich guy? Why is it actually important? Or why is it important that he's tall? Or why is it important that she, wears all the latest designer clothes, or whatever people are looking for in their partners? And I think they have to, the whys and going deeper and finding out the actual emotion associated with it. Because I'm definitely aware of the idea that, like, I have a mom that's not impressed by anything I do, no matter how well things go for me. And it's like, okay, I can find myself, in rooms with people who may not be as, as a public figure. There are people who are enamored with the work I do, and they're already fans of me. And then there's people who have no idea who I am, and I
It's
can
like
find
that,
myself wanting to win them over.
it's that joke when I forget his name, I'm sorry, but the man who just became mayor of London, it's like, yeah, but his mom wanted him to be a doctor.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
and then you're just up against this brick wall of like, okay, where's my truth here? You say in your book that a lot of people think that love is complicated. What would you tell people to make it simple?
I think we can use a New York analogy. A lot of the things people think are love is just what you see on Canal Street. It's those fake Gucci belts. So it's like, attention, affection, adoration, power, success, control, validation, clout,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things. These aren't love. This isn't love. These are the fact. These are the bootleg versions of love. That may look like love, but they don't hold the quality of love. They don't have the sustainability and the feeling of love. Love isn't. um and I also differentiated simple from easy. Love is simple, not easy. But love is what's left when everything else is gone. You don't have to do anything to achieve love. You don't have to chase love. You don't have to win love. You don't have to qualify for love. Love is what's left when you clear away all the mess. Love is peace. And that is something that needs to be understood. And then we need to understand that, we live in a consumeristic society, which is going to forever teach us to get more and more and more and more, buy shit, be happy. So we start to view love as a commodity, when really love is the default. And we're doing a whole bunch of mess on top of that. And, self-care isn't self-love. A bubble bath isn't self-love. Self-love is accepting yourself as you are. Self-love is looking in the mirror and looking at your body from a non-critical lens. Love is going easy on yourself. Love is figuring out how your parents messed you up, not blaming them, and then becoming that nurturing parent you need. Love is being that best friend that you need. Love is saying no. Love is showing your teeth. Love is standing up for yourself. you know um Love is accepting your imperfections. Love is understanding that there is no enoughness. There is no worthiness. Humans can't be measured in terms of worthiness or enoughness. There isn't enough of a human. And what we have to do is just challenge some of these old ideas, like this "you complete me" idea, or "my
Mm,
better half" idea. These are ideas that have been sold to us, and they've served a purpose. Even the knight in shining armor and damsel in distress, like, those have roots in real life, where during feudal societies, when everybody, was just living on a farm, if you were a young man, your only opportunity for any type of social climbing was to go to the army and hopefully come back alive and come back a hero. And now your options for marriage have increased. And then,
right.
and the lessons being taught to the women was, so men is like, make yourself more appealing to be chosen. And then for the women, make yourself more appealing to be chased. And now, what's the knight in shining armor? Is it a Lamborghini? Is it a watch? Is it shiny dress shoes? And this has been an interesting, like, I was a broke artist for years, and things have only been going well for me for the last 5 years. And even in that capacity, coming to Los Angeles and trying to figure out, well, where do I fit in here? Within the first month, I got hit with so what do you do? How much do you make? I got hit with that, having
Within
a
the first
ran
month, not the first
within the first
interaction.
month. Not the
Shit,
first
you need to go to a
interaction.
Greek
No.
event, man. Greek events, they'll tell you at the
Well,
check-in.
that's the moms. Those are probably the moms saying that, right?
No,
They're
I've
trying to.
had like I got turned away at an event a couple years ago because they were like, "Oh, you're the matchmaker. We don't want you here." And it was about I have employees that I have 2 employees now that live in Greece, and I was trying to learn a little bit more about tax law and stuff.
Yeah.
And they turned me away. They wouldn't. I started crying. That was like my natural reaction was just to start crying because I was just like, I wasn't seen as like Maria, the business owner. I was belittled into this position that they don't understand. And they, I do well for myself. And so it's just like, I was like, what's happening? Why can't I learn? Like, whatever.
No, it's very reductive. I think for me, I was talking from the dating perspective.
Yeah, no, yeah. I'm sorry for giving you my perspective on this one.
Oh, no, not at all. But I also learned, like, even through therapy, like having a female therapist explain that. She goes, it's an overcorrection to, it's also an overcorrection to the women who've had to take care of a man. So you don't need to wear a Rolex and drive a Lamborghini. You just need to signal through your clothes that you don't live in your mom's basement.
I mean, yeah, for me, it's like when I was single and started consciously dating for partners that I wanted to have kids with. I remember that for me, the first and foremost on that list of qualities was like, I want an equitable partner. I don't need an equal partner, but I need an equitable partner. Like we come in with our own strengths and we're a team, and I'm not assigning roles here. We're just going to figure it out. Whoever has to do it, like equity. Like I want that. And I feel like I got that and it worked out well. We're 10 years now, but like,
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm obsessed with him still, totally obsessed with him, absolutely obsessed with him. Another thing that you mentioned in your book is your reference to the need to like sit with your pain to experience love. Is that like in reference to like being vulnerable, like understanding your vulnerabilities?
Understanding your vulnerabilities is also having a healthy relationship with yourself. The antidote to, there's that famous quote, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And, when you're by yourself, you can either be lonely or you can be in peaceful solitude. It just depends on where you are mentally at that point. So I think I watched a comedian that said, the high divorce rates are because most people get into relationships to outsource an anecdote to their loneliness when there's no solution outside for somebody's loneliness. Loneliness is our own, our inability to stay with our own company and sit in a room quietly. And right now, I feel like in modern society, people's definition of being alone is being on their phone. Where they're like, "Oh, I don't want to go out. I'm going to stay in." You're not staying in. You're just staying in, staring at life through your phone or through a screen or watching TV. But like sitting there by yourself, having to hear what you have to say, having to develop a relationship with yourself and be vulnerable and hear your shit. I think that is something that people avoid. And because they avoid that, they get the dopamine from other people. And I think that's where they chase affection in the wrong directions. So sitting with pain, what I realized is, as somebody who was raised in a household where we didn't even acknowledge the pain, it was disconnecting me from people who mattered. Because if you came to me and started sharing your pain, it would trigger my pain. And I wouldn't want to feel my pain. So I would be the guy and try to solve your pain. And either I would try to come up with a solution, or I'd hit you with the, well, there's people who are worse off, or I hit you with the, like, you're not even, like, some gaslighting. You're not even a victim in this situation. But
you weren't listening.
The subconscious motives are just to shut the pain up, not to shut you up. I don't want to feel the pain. And it wasn't until very recently, probably 2 years ago, after doing some DMT, that I learned that, like,
What's
empathy,
DMT?
it's a plant. It's not a plant medicine. It's a poison from a frog that they extract, and then you smoke it, and then you die.
Oh shit, dude! I live in New Jersey. All we have here is meth.
Yeah, DMT. Have you heard of like mushrooms and ayahuasca? So DMT is a chemical. DMT is a short form for a very long chemical name that I can't pronounce, but our brains produce it. Over 50% of all living animals or living things produce it, including plants and different animals.
Wow. Okay.
And the theory is, and please don't quote me on this and attack me if I'm wrong, you are flooded with DMT the day you die. So the day you die, you will be flooded with it. That is people's, I see the light. I saw my grandma.
Does it give you a sense of euphoria?
Yeah. So the theory is, no matter how you die, death will not be an unpleasant experience. That's kind of what it is. And
that's the hope. So when you took this euphoric substance, what were your realizations? Did you hit like the 5th level of Maslow's hierarchy, like self-actualization?
No. So this is what it did, is it was kind of like, it's like an inverse journey. So it's not like I went on this journey and I had to like learn lessons. It kind of just does the work for you. It breaks down all your walls. knocks you out, you wake up, and I'm just hypersensitive. Like I feel everything on my skin. I feel everybody's pain. I feel everything. And again, it didn't last forever. It lasted for like 3 months, and then life.
3 months.
Yeah, and then life built up new walls and stuff. But like, yeah, like sex was bananas. But hearing people's pain,
When you say
I really
bananas, like
felt it.
positively or like
Yeah,
negatively?
everything was just, I was just hypersensitive. It was like
Okay.
living. It was as if I was living life wearing a full body condom and someone just ripped it off, and all of a sudden, like everything, I could feel everything way more. And I think what it did was whatever protective fortress I had been building up all these years,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it was a prison. And instead of me doing the important work to break down that prison and get escape, this DMT came and just like Kool-Aid man punched a hole in the wall and was like, here you go. This is what life could be like if you knew how to surrender. And the first thing I realized was when people are in pain, feel the pain with them and just give them a fucking hug and just sit there in pain together.
Oh yeah.
And that's what empathy actually is. And then that never occurred to me in my entire life that's what I thought empathy was. Like, oh, just understand what they're going through. It's like, no, feel what they're going through and just let them feel it, you feel it, and feel it together. And oftentimes, especially with women, if they're speaking to you, they're not looking for a solution. They're just looking to be seen, heard, and validated.
Right.
And that wasn't something that, I was given growing up. So I didn't truly understand
Oh,
that.
that's such a good lesson. You know who taught a lot of people this lesson, believe it or not? Aziz Ansari on Parks and Rec.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, that's actually a really, a lot of men who have watched it started using that method where he said, he was hearing someone complain and he was telling someone, like, when a woman's complaining, they don't want a solution. They just want you to acknowledge their pain and just be like, wow, that sucks.
Yeah.
And that, like, my husband totally was influenced by that too. Like suddenly he was saying, like, I'd be like, well, like going on my rant, he'd be like, wow, that sucks. And I'm like, yes, it does suck. Thank you. Like, I don't want your solution. Like, leave me alone. Just let me talk, and yeah. So you have a wonderful smile. That's like really funny to see you do that.
Thank you so much.
So we have a question from the audience. I'd love to take it on. So welcome to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. How can we help you?
Hi, I have a question about dating. So I am 30 years old, and I find that every time I get myself into a new relationship and it becomes time to start getting vulnerable, they end up shutting off and not wanting to date anymore. I know I come with baggage. I think everybody does, but mine might be a bit more extreme. And I just want some advice on maybe how to ease into it better, or should I just continue to be my vulnerable self?
Humble, I think this question is like perfect for you.
Is it? So
yeah.
What my therapist made me do was she said you need to have, she said you need to be vulnerable in every interaction, but you can't start with the most vulnerable stuff on day one. But what she had me do was practice being vulnerable to strangers. And she goes, find some appropriate moments of vulnerability that you could tell a stranger that wouldn't, have them running the other way. So for me, I think the two that I had were, the first one was about having a dog. I had a dog, lived out his life, 11 years. He passed away. And then I just never wanted a dog ever again, until recently, where I have a puppy. She's just sitting behind me. But talking about this idea that I didn't want a dog because I was afraid of the idea of losing her again. Mm-hmm. So it was this, micro moment of vulnerability that you could share with a stranger you met for the first time that doesn't feel like TMI. It doesn't feel like anything of that capacity. And then she's like, come up with something deeper, so then maybe if I knew someone a little bit longer, talk about my experiences with racism and how that's impacted me and how that's impacted decisions I'm making now, especially as a public figure, especially as somebody who gets more attention than he's normally used to getting in a positive light, and how I can do that. So I think working your way up, I think, is important in that capacity. As a guy, again, I was never encouraged or taught the value of being vulnerable, even now, as somebody who understands that vulnerability is the currency for connection.
Totally.
I've even seen that as, especially being in Los Angeles, I've seen that being performative. We've all seen people on social media crying in front of their camera, telling you a story. And like, are you doing this to be vulnerable? Or are you doing this for attention? And I think I've experienced that as well. So I think from that side, I don't think there's anything wrong with being vulnerable. I think probably just understanding capacity as well. The one thing I can say as a guy, and this is a super new realization, probably in the last couple of months, is that when I first am on a date with a woman, I spend so much time trying to win her over that I'm not even paying attention if she's any good for me. I'm not evaluating her.
Women do this too.
Yeah.
They get
And
so excited.
I think the difference between men and women are, if you win the man over, I don't know how much, and I could be completely wrong here, but if you win him over and then now he shows an enthusiasm towards you, how often does that scare you and be like, oh, wait a minute, I just want to win, and I think for me, it's not even paying attention to any red flags or anything up until I scale that first wall. And then we pull back. And I think that's the definition of a fuckboy. I think if anybody wants to have empathy for a fuckboy, it's someone who's taught to win them over, then figure out if they're good. Be chosen. Then amongst those who choose you, figure out, who's a good match for you. And then that's where that pull away happens, where it's like, wait a minute.
Or even just reverse it too. Like you just mentioned an example with women, just reverse it though. Like how many women have pulled away from a man who's showing consistent communication patterns, but because they've never experienced that, they feel like I'm being smothered. And I'm not saying, like, there are some people who are fucking psychopaths who do smother people, but then there's people who are just like, hey, let's go out again. Why aren't, and then you're like, what we just went out on Monday. Why would we go out on Wednesday? And it's like, well, that's dating,
Yeah. And I think I've learned that to be a red flag in itself. And it's like, all right, cool. If that scares you, then you're definitely not a person I should be around.
What's crazy is this morning, I don't know about you, but this morning I watched like 3/4 of the first episode of the new documentary, Harry and Meghan. And did you know, okay, first of all, this is really important. Okay. He slid into her DMs or something. That's how they met or whatever. But when they went on their first date, they went out for a drink from 6 to 7. She had plans after, which I think some men would be like, what? Especially a person with that kind of power stature, let's say. Like they might be like, you have plans after this? Like, what do you mean? Like, that sort of thing. But then she wanted to see him again. Instead of waiting around for him to call her, she called him the next day and was like, hey, let's go to dinner tomorrow. I'm leaving in 2 days. I want to see you again. And I think like people get so scared of just living in their truth and being that kind of vulnerable. Like Meghan wanted to see him again. That is a place of vulnerability. And the truth is that if he didn't want to see her again, he would have not picked up the phone. Like, I don't know. I feel like, and then to answer, the woman who just asked the question, one of the things that I would say with vulnerability is like the power of journaling is there. Like that helps in you, but also if you want to hack it a little bit, I have discovered that going on a vacation with just yourself and being in your own company, that's challenging yourself. That is challenging your own reality, right? Because usually when we go on vacation, we're with other people, we're distracted, whatever. Be by yourself, enjoy your own company. I'm not asking you to go for like 2 weeks, just 3 days away. But see how you feel in that, right? Like figure out where those triggers are. Every time you feel a bit of anxiety, like what's triggering that? What's happening? Because that's how you build you want to be vulnerable for others, but you also have to learn to be vulnerable for yourself.
Yeah. And I think the other one on top of that is, it sucks that you get vulnerable with a guy and he pulls away. That's his story, not yours. And then also if you make adjustments and stop being your authentic self, then the only reward is you get to continue not being your authentic self. The only prize for playing any game is to keep playing the game. And if that's the game you're going to end up playing, to not quote unquote scare a guy away, then you'll be doing that forever. And then, finding other ways to kind of, compromise and compensate for that. I don't know if you guys watch White Lotus, but the second season really shows that well with the character who's definitely, the character is just definitely not in an ideal relationship. They continually have a smile on their face and they view it as, oh, well, I just, I make up for it by spending his money or by catching him off guard and making him jealous and doing this. And it's like, oh, like, so this is how you're, this is what life is now.
But these are also like forms of toxic dating patterns too. Like if your reaction after being vulnerable and being, like you said, like them not in respect or acknowledgement of that, and they step away, reacting to that by not being vulnerable next, that's a toxic dating pattern in the sense that like now you're going to be attracting people you don't want because now they think that's the baseline when the baseline is truly something else. I think that's a really good question. And Humble, I really liked your input. Let's get our next question. Welcome to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. How can we help you?
Hi, thank you for taking my question. So, mine is also about dating. I'm 31 and I just don't think the love of my life is on an app.
Okay.
Because I just feel like I've been attracting the wrong kind of men, but I want to meet people in real life and I'm not really sure where to go. I feel like a lot of the places where I already go, it's usually women. And I love taking myself out to dinner or something, but I'm usually reading and I've been told I have RBF. And so I feel like that makes me unapproachable. And I want to know how I can, I guess, make myself more approachable to these places that I will be going to find a man in real life.
I love this question. Just in case you don't know, Humble, RBF is not a drug.
Resting bitch face.
That's right.
I mean, trust me, I feel like most people look very unapproachable when they're the default. Like when people are thinking, they look upset. I definitely do the same thing. I have a friend, Matthew Hussey, who's a popular dating advice guy, and he talks a lot about this concept of like, back in the days, the women used to drop the handkerchief to show the guy that they want him to pick it up, and that was their interaction. And there's no modern version of that.
Well, hold up. There is one in Greece. Oh my God, I'm going to blow your mind. Are you ready? This is like the most disgusting thing, but it totally works. So if you're at a club and a guy's into you, and you're like, so everyone smokes, right? So you've got your cigarette, you're waiting for him. So if he does his lighter and he has his finger, the second finger pointing at you while he's lighting it, that means I like you. And then if you smoke, if you blow it into his face, that means I like you too.
I love it. See, but the signal is there. The signals are there. The ambiguity isn't. I recently watched some dudes I saw on Instagram. They host a podcast in their car, and it was, and it was they were going through Starbucks, and so it's all being filmed. He orders a drink, and then the girl compliments the tattoo on his hand, and they have a little brief interaction.
That is a total signal. No?
Wait for it.
Okay.
So she compliments his tattoo, and he goes, "Oh, I think you have tattoos." And she goes, "Yeah, they're all covered up because of work." He goes, "Okay, cool." He pulls away. As soon as he pulls away, he's like, "See, I don't know what that means. I don't know if she was flirting with me. I don't know if she wasn't." And then the guy in the passenger seat's like, "Bro, we got to go back. You got to get her number. This is the story I want to tell at your wedding." He wrapped back around, said, "Hey, I forgot my straw." Went there. He said, "Hey, I want a straw, but also I would love if I could have your number." She's like, "Oh no, I have a boyfriend."
Okay, that's okay.
It's okay. It's okay for the girl, but for the guy now, he's going to question every single interaction moving forward because there are no clear signals. He doesn't know. He doesn't have the shoot. No one's blowing smoke in his face. It's
kind of like that TikTok trend where like people show like, let me show you how I look when my crush comes in, and it's like this quick glance, and then they look back.
Yeah,
there's no signal. You're right. They're absolutely there. And
at the same, so when Matthew brought up the dropping of the or even the cigarette thing, these are at least they're clear. And I think, and I mean, again, signals not even just for meeting people, even signals when you're in dating, like signals to.
But see, why do you need a signal? Okay, so I don't know if our caller
you definitely need a signal. Well, so the reason I was saying this for our caller is because what he mentioned was he goes sometimes it's opening the door. It's opening that door in the context of like, he's like the last person I met because I'm working at a coffee shop. And then she looked at me and she said, "Hey, looks like you've had a hard day." But that started the conversation. Right. And again, even for men, they still don't know if a woman starts a conversation, if that means she's just saying something or she's trying to initiate. And I think that's where there is a big challenge.
I had a go-to accessory when I was single, and I don't know, every time I wore it, men always bought me drinks. It was the dumbest thing, but you won't even believe it. It was a Swatch watch, but it was like bright red and like a red, like a blood red. And every time I wore it, I mean, it was the dumbest watch. It's just a watch. But I noticed that every time I wore it, a guy would buy me a drink. So I was like, okay, if I want a free drink, I'll wear it. And we're talking, I want you to know something. I'm 5'11", I'm voluptuous. I have resting bitch face too, like all that stuff. But it was kind of like peacocking from a woman's perspective. Like it was the easiest accessory to comment on without coming off as a creep. So it just started the conversation. So every time I wore it, a guy would be like, "Oh my God, I love your watch," which no, they don't. It's a Swatch. Who gives a shit? right? But it was just a way to open the door for me to be like, oh my God, yeah, tell me more about you. Where are you from? Like you just immediately have that conversation and figure it out.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic. And I mean, now and it's on the guy to make the move, and at least there's something there. But again,
Now everyone's on Google looking up not only, you know, the drugs, but now they're looking up red swatches. So
I guess the way I look at it is I look at the misconnections based off like I think often men don't know.
No, they don't.
They don't
You're totally
know.
right.
And
they don't
and
know.
also like
It's like Jimmy Fallon and Nicole Kidman. He had no idea.
Yeah. I think that's extremely common. And I think also
so what would you tell our caller then? So like one thing I would do is like, I don't know how extrovert our caller is, but I would just
I feel like
go get yours. Like to me, it'd be like, I would just be really obvious in the sense of like, I would just start talking. Like if you see a guy that you're interested in, I would just go up and be like, hey, that's it. Like I wouldn't even say more. I would just be like, hey, what are they going to say? Well, they're not going to say hello, you know? I know that sounds like really simplistic, but I feel like every time I'm at a social event, I'm looking around the room and everyone that's like on their phone, they're all hoping someone comes up to them just to say hi and just take the pressure off of them so they don't feel like a loser. But maybe that's just my own lived experience and perspective on this. Humble, what do you think? Am I like?
No, I think you're 1000% absolutely correct. And I think it is challenging just the old ways that women need to be approached. And I think at the end of the day, people don't know. I think that's the big thing. People just don't know. And
don't forget now we've got the new generation coming in. I don't know how old you are. Are you over 35?
I'm 40.
You're 40. Okay. So I'm 38. So you and I are basically the same age. So we have the same like cultural references. Do you recognize that people that are 32 and below have never experienced analog dating like you and I did?
Yeah.
That's never, they don't have that. Like our caller right now, she does not probably remember a world where online dating apps didn't exist. Right?
I do remember, but
were you young or were you old enough to be dating?
Yeah, I had a boyfriend at the time when dating apps came into being, and then we broke up. And then ever since then, it's basically been only
apps.
Dating. Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you something. Did you know that most people are only like 1 or 2 connections away? What is the word? 1 or 2 degrees away from their partner. And so some of the best advice that I could give you, and maybe Humble agrees, is that you need to, I always tell people like, you need to expand your social network. And so one of the things that I would do, like you mentioned about going to events, and it's a lot of women, I want you to hit up Eventbrite right now. So first off, what I want you to do is look at your calendar for the next 3 months. And I want you to block out 2 days for the next 3 months. I say this to all of my women in the Agape Intensive. And they block out 2 days over the calendar for the next 90 days. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go on Eventbrite and you're going to filter events for the days that you are free. And you're going to start inputting events. And this is not the place to be putting cupcake decorating classes. This is, you know, maybe Humble, you know, his book just came out. If he's, you know, speaking at the Strand or another independent bookstore, you're going to go to that because I love going to independent bookstores. And when there's an author speaking, like an author reading over their book, because then you see all the other readers and the ratios are pretty good. And you're there for a common interest, or like, it doesn't have to be a singles event, right? You could do tequila tasting. You could do cigar rolling class. You could get your wine license, go to an improv class. Concerts are good too.
You guys have that artists in common. You guys can talk
right.
about.
Comedy clubs, like having someone who shares the same sense of humor as you. Like there's so many things that you have to start inputting heavily, and also make new friends, because your friends suck. They're not setting you up with anyone that they know. So you got to start.
Yeah, and you got to put it out there.
Network.
You got to. I think putting it out there. Totally. If you're in the process of like, I am serious looking for a partner, like the whole people don't know what they don't know, and putting that. And I know that just I'm in the process of selling a book, and just me putting it out there, like, hey, I'm looking for opportunities to speak. I'm looking for opportunities to be on podcasts. It's no different than dating. I'm telling everybody my intentions. Now I'm at least in the back of their mind if a situation pops up, and they'll drop my name. And I think it's the same thing where it's like, hey, look, I'm single. I'm looking for a partner. This is kind of what I'm looking for.
Right.
And I think that'll definitely help. And
you need to treat your dating life like Humble is treating his book. Like he is trying to get his, you know, he's trying to spread the truth of love.
Yes. Buy the book. Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
How to be loved The D is in parentheses. I want to learn more about that before we close off. But that's what you got to do. You got to, finding, who you marry, who you choose to be with. That's one of the most important decisions you'll ever have in your life. And you have to treat it in that same productivity level that you would any other big decision you would have in your life. So I really appreciate your question. Thank you so much for calling in. Before we wrap up, Humble, tell me why the title of your book has the D in parentheses, how to be loved, and D is in parentheses.
Because I think everyone's looking to be loved. And I think the spoiler alert is the only way to be loved is to be loved. And that's, when you open the book, that's the first thing it says here. It says, more than showing you how to be loved, I'm showing you how to be loved.
I love that. That's
and,
awesome.
And that's the important idea. We're just recognizing that we are a source of love, more so than a destination. And we're establishing pathways of love between us and other people.
If someone wants to enjoy the ASMR that is your voice, where can they find you?
They can find me on social media, everywhere at Humble the Poet. And I do recognize the ASMR. That is my voice. I do have quite a few things on Audible.
I'm so excited to
standalone. I have standalone audiobooks. In addition, How to Be Loved is coming out in audio, but I also have some other standalone audiobooks that I've done with my publisher that are a lot shorter, like 25, 30 minutes. And I'm looking to work with some of the other platforms on the same thing. But you can find me at Humble the Poet everywhere.
I love that. I will include all of the links in the show notes, as well as a link to buy Humble the Poet's book, How to Be Loved. Humble, thank you so much for joining me on the Ask a Matchmaker podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Ask a Matchmaker podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate and review. And of course, if you don't, follow me on Instagram at Matchmaker Maria. You can also learn all about the different programs and offerings that I have by visiting the link in my bio, or of course, the links in the show notes. Thank you again for listening. Be lovable, but more importantly, be likable. Although in this episode, be lovable too. See you next week.